911, where's your emergency?
As we begin to study public safety, one of the obvious concerns is an increase in crime. What we believe is not that necessarily the crime rate will go up, but because the population is going to grow, you're going to see sort of a corresponding increase in the level of crime. So it's not that new people would commit more crimes, it's simply that by having 10 or 20,000 more people in the region, there's going to be a small increase in the overall number of crimes, not necessarily the crime rate.
It's my opinion that the studies we've done, the crimes that are going to, some of these have experienced a very slight increase in criminal activity. But it's not from so much the people that have come into the community, it's that the criminals that we already have a bigger selection to choose from. If you go to these man camps and we visited these areas, yeah, they've had some slight increases, but it's no more than the national and average trends that you would deal with anyway. And it's not so much from those individuals that came to work, although you know what, if we're getting in 20 or 30,000 people and they bring in their families, you may have a few more domestic issues because so yes, we may have to deal with that. But as far as a criminal element coming in, I don't think that's the case.
As we looked at the nature of the construction workers, generally these are people that travel from job to job to provide for their family. These are people that are willing to work 70, 80 hours a week sometimes under very demanding conditions, and oftentimes when they're done working, they simply want to go home and have a place to relax. So there's not an expected increase in crime associated with those people.
I do think that this is a concept, and let me tell you, that's up to the people that live in those communities, whether they want man camps or not, regardless, or women camps, however you want to say it. I'm not going to dictate to the community where they should be, and that's up to individual neighbors and and neighborhoods, and that's their right to do that. From a law enforcement standpoint, I don't know, these people just come in here to work. I have a next door neighbor who has a very nice home, who lives in my subdivision, who was an electrician, who traveled all over the country to work. That was, he sometimes couldn't find work here, or he found better paying work somewhere else. I compare it to that. He is a skilled laborer who's coming to our community. We obviously, I think right now our unemployment rate is like around 4%, which is unbelievable. You don't want to work here, it's probably because you don't want to work. It has nothing to do with your skill or anything like that. So, that panic kind of concerns me, but you know what? I'm going to say it again. That's up to the individuals in our community whether they want a man or woman camp in their area. That's not for me as sheriff to decide. That's up to them. But do I see it as those being the problem? Not necessarily. Will there be some of those? Absolutely.
We believe it's going to take law enforcement, EMS, fire, longer to get to different places throughout the region. They're fully aware of that. They're really confident and focused on their incident management and clearing those accidents as quickly as they can.
Our public safety infrastructure here is just like all the rest of our infrastructure. We're really sized for about 180, 190,000 people. And with our population going up to maybe 220, 230, something like that, we're going to be short resources to deal with the things that come along with that, such as traffic accidents, road construction, road closures, may have a flooding issue or something like that. So our infrastructure, like the roads, will be strained, and what that's going to translate to is there will be more accidents. That will call for more response by public safety agencies, law enforcement, fire, EMS, and that's going to translate into longer response times.
Other than to make sure that we strategically place our police officers in particular zones or areas so that we can continue to get a quick response. And that's going to, we always constantly monitor that. So regardless, we're going to have to adapt to that no matter how the problem exists, whether it's through influx of people, whether through I mean, we do that now with accidents. So, you know, regardless of how we have the problem, we're going to have to adapt to that, and we will, to find a solution to keep the response times down as low as possible.
With the increase in traffic that we're going to have to allow some extra time for if we have an evacuation for a hurricane, for example. And we'll have to start earlier. We'll have to ask people maybe to leave earlier than we normally would. For years, we've used a 36-hour clearance time for our area, but I would expect that we're going to need to add at least 10 to 12 hours to that.
I think we're going to have to calculate that on the threat and what's coming at us on how we do it. But you know, the good thing about that, in my opinion, is you have good qualified people that are going to determine that, and we're going to figure that out. Our plans won't change. It just may be a timing issue that may change.
We have talked to the One Worker Village that's underway, and they're doing planning for that. We do recognize that it potentially adds other people that might strain our transportation, but we are in talks with them about that on how they're going to potentially handle that.
There is a potential that new services could be needed. One of the things that we looked at is perhaps reallocating how services are provided now. You know, there's an awful lot of capacity within the system. Perhaps that capacity is not in the right place, so maybe there's an opportunity to shift some of the existing capacity around without building new capacity within particularly the fire protection system.
Obviously, as the population expands, we're going to have more demand for those services. Ambulance in particular, that's going to have to go, the increase in ambulance service will have to go along with the population increase. Fire department's a little different issue. As the impact study shows, we're going to need a lot of additional units of housing, and as those housing units are built, depending on where they're placed, it's going to put a strain on the fire service in that area.
We believe the other sort of broad impact is going to be in the loss of trained staff, whether it's law enforcement, EMS, firefighters joining the plants directly, or whether it's some of the larger departments, perhaps that pay better, recruiting from some of the smaller departments to backfill their own losses. So ultimately, we believe the smaller departments are going to feel these losses the strongest, simply because the larger departments would be able to replace the staff they lose with some of the staff from perhaps smaller or more remote departments.
Many of the public safety agencies that I've talked to are already experiencing some personnel shortages. Many of the fire departments, for example, are not at their full authorized staff, and they're finding it more and more difficult to find qualified applicants, in many cases because they're able to find higher paying jobs in the private sector now.
This is not an unhealthy problem, in my opinion. But we have seen some officers leave for better high paying jobs to our industry and go back to school for maybe some P-Tech degrees and things like that to become operators. You know, obviously you're talking about a much higher pay scale. But if you look at the benefits package of government, and I'm talking about, you know, the salary may not be quite comparable, but when you look at the big picture, the retirement, the health insurance, the benefits that go with, we're not that far off. So, you know, I try to tell people when they come, and of course I want somebody to better themselves, whether they stay in law enforcement or they do not. I want them to better themselves, and that's what they have to do to provide for their family. Then I encourage that. It's not my place to discourage that. But I do think it's going to keep us on our toes to try to stay competitive at some point. Right now, has not become a big problem, but we're going to have to stay again ahead of the curve on that also. And we are aware of it, and we are monitoring it. You know, we have been very fortunate in Calcasieu Parish that we have always had a great line of communication. Myself, the other area chiefs, whether it be fire, but for sure the other area chiefs and I have always worked together very closely and as one unit. I think people saw that with Hurricane Rita and our response in that regards. Not only police, but all government seems to work better here than in most areas. Now, with that said, I think as a whole, it basically just formalized it. In other words, we've always had that communication. Now we kind of have a formal, more, I don't want to say more organized, because I think we were pretty organized before. But we've done some things even before the impact study and before the GO group was formed. We started an intelligence group, and now again it's just kind of formalized, and so I'm very excited about that, and that it's kind of another example of how we've stayed ahead of the curve here in Calcasieu. But again, we got to continue that.
One of the public safety goals is to increase the amount of information that's available. We don't live in a big metropolitan area where you have news helicopters and things, so we're looking at alternative methods to get information quickly out to the public so that they can judge, do they need to alter their route to work, and maybe people will probably be doing workarounds on that anyway, just based on the day-to-day traffic that we have. We're looking at the traditional media like newspapers, television, radio, but we're also looking heavily at social media. Of course, a lot of people know nowadays that particularly younger people get all of their information from social media outlets. So we're looking at some programs that we can use to get that information out, some that may post automatically to these various social websites, emergency information, not routine, but emergency information. And hopefully that will make a greater impact on the population.